Hi everyone, I'm Kristy from KristyCoromandel.com and welcome to my Getting Started with Card Making series. We're up to episode 3, but before we get started on that, let's have a recap of our last episode. In episode 2, we talked about stamps, the different types of stamps that are out in the market, from wood to cling to photopolymer. We discussed the properties of each type of stamp that is available. I shared with you on how to assemble your cling mount stamp sets from Stampin' Up! And then finally I shared with you some tips on things to look for when purchasing your stamp set, so you could get the maximum amount of use for it and more value for your money. And finally, I set you with a challenge to go ahead and either go through your current stash of stamp sets that you have, or to go ahead and purchase a stamp set that meets the criteria that I shared with you. And to put that aside, because we're going to come back to it at a future episode. Well, today we are learning all about ink. There are multiple different types of ink out there, and each single one of them has a purpose. So I'm going to share with you some of the most common types of ink that are available, and also when and why we should use that ink on which project. So let's have a look, shall we? Okay, so the first ink I want to share with you today is our classic ink pads right here. They come in a range of 50 different colors. 40 which are our core colors, and 10 which we call ink colors. And 5 of our ink colors rotate every year. We'll get 5 will be discontinued and 5 new colors will come in. That is just making sure that Stampin' Up! Are on the mark for the colors popularity that's out in the market at the moment. It's giving you vibrant color choices every single time. So that's one thing I love about Stampin' Up's color range that they have. Now these here is what the ink pads look like, and I'll briefly share those with you. And they also have the old style. So some of you may be familiar with the old style, and this is the new style. They've had for about a year now, this new style here. And the old style went out briefly about a year ago. So both of them have a foam ink pad. Okay, so just flip that over for you so you can see. Okay, they both have a foam ink pad. Right, and the beauty of having a foam pad is that when you stamp and apply pressure, you're going to get a nice even color every time. So here is, I've already pre-stamped this, okay, using a variety of 3 different colors here from Stampin' Up! I've got Granny Apple Green, Mellow Mumbo and Balmy Blue. And you can see when I've stamped that on Whisper White cardstock how bright, bold, how that color has just gone all the way through as well. There's no splotchy marks or anything. Okay, so that's one of the things that I love about Stampin' Up! Ink pad. And then you can use the same color on the same color's cardstock. So Stampin' Up! Also carry the ink and the cardstock in the same color, which I love. I love their coordination. So I've got Granny Green Apple, Granny Apple Green, I always get that mixed up, ink on my Granny Apple Green cardstock. I have Mellow Mumbo on Mellow Mumbo cardstock, and I have my Balmy Blue as well on Balmy Blue cardstock. So you can see how vibrant that is at all times. Okay, so because we've got these 2 different styles, let me show you how both of them open and close, okay, in case you've got either one of these at home. So we'll start with the old style. Okay, so the old style ink pad has these grooved things down the side here that makes you fit in your hand very comfortable when it goes to opening your ink pad. As you can see, mine is very well used and I've got ink all over my ink pad. So what you're going to do is holding it like this, and on the side here you'll see they've got a little lip. I've got a label here that tells me this what my ink pad is. I'm just going to apply pressure to this section right here with my thumb. So I'm going to hold my ink pad and just apply pressure with my thumb, and that flips out at the end. Then I can carefully lift this and then slide that shut till it locks into place, and then I can stamp. So now let's close our ink pad. So once again, I'm going to hold it like so. I'm going to apply, you can either pull here or you can apply pressure and push on the back there. So I can pull that till it gets to the end. I can then flip it over and then click it back into place, and now that is closed. Here's our new style of ink pad that came out about a year ago. Now I don't have little dots or anything down the side, and it is a bit narrow. As you can see, the sizing is slightly smaller, okay, not by much, and it's slightly different thickness as well, but it still gives you the exact same quality, which is what I love. I've got my little lip right here. I'm going to lift this up, okay, like a makeup compact. Okay, so I can lift that up, open it wide, and then slide it into place, and I can then begin stamping. And then to close it, I just pull on this tab, lift it up, and put it down. Now, one thing that you would notice is that the ink pad is upside down when we store it. So when you do store your ink pads, you need to store them flat. And these have little grooves in the feet there and on my feet. So I can actually stack my ink pads on top of each other. Okay, these ones I can't stack on top of each other. They're not designed to stack, so they will come off, but these ones do. Okay, so then stack nicely. Now you don't want to store them like this, okay, because all the ink will just drain out of it completely. So you definitely want to store them flat. Okay, so when you buy your ink pad for the first time, it's going to come in this little plastic film here. Okay, so let's show you how we assemble it, or how we label it. So I'm just going to cut that off. I can take all that off. Okay, so on the back here, I have a bunch of labels. And Stampin' Up! Have done an awesome job, because it doesn't matter where in the world you live, we've got a label for your language right here. We have a label with your language on it right here. So I'm going to grab my smoky slate one, and to do that I'm just going to use my scissors and gently lift up the plastic film that's right here, okay? I'm going to grab the smoky slate one right off there. Okay, and this is the front of my ink pad. I know that because they've got this little lip right here, and like I said earlier, that these are quite a little bit stiff when you first purchase them, but they will get a little bit looser as time goes on. So I'm just going to put the label down here at the bottom, and I'm simply just going to stick it on. That way, when I have them all sitting on my shelf, I know exactly which ink is what. Now, you'll notice also underneath here, we have this plain color one right here. Well, this is what we use this one for. So you're going to open up my ink pad. I've got this little gap right here. This is perfect for this. Okay, and the reason we do this is because if I've got multiple different ink pads open, because I'm using multiple ones at the same time, I can then simply look at this here and I know exactly what color it is. Because looking at that direct, you don't really know what color that is. Well, I can see it's a bit greeny, so I can tell that. But normally you wouldn't. But by having this little strip here, I know that's my gray. Or I can turn it around and go, oh, there's smoky slate. Okay? So that's how we assemble or label our ink pads. Now, when you do purchase your ink pads, I do highly recommend that you also purchase an ink refill with these. Okay? They will dry out eventually. So when you are using them and stamping, you want to make sure that once you finish stamping on using that color, that you close it up straight away. Because being exposed to the elements will dry out your ink pad a lot faster, especially if you're in an air-conditioned room. Okay, so it's always handy to have an ink refill on hand at any one time. Now, how do you refill your ink pad? I'm going to quickly show you how to do that now. I've got one right here that needs re-inking. Okay, so I'm simply going to grab my refill. Now there's 15 ml in one of these refills, and I'm just going to place a couple of dots. Okay, just all over my ink pad. Now you can use a spoon, you can use a anything. I've got an old membership card here that's expired. Okay, so I am just simply dragging this across my ink pad. getting that colour all nicely soaked in there. Okay, and then I can easily wipe this off with a baby wipe or wash it off. And you let that sit there for about 10 minutes, okay? I'm going to let that soak in and keep going. Now you may need to put a bit more in it, but generally you won't. And you'll be able to tell when your ink pad needs re-inking because the stamp quality won't be as vibrant or as clear as what these ones were that we stamped previously. Okay, so give it 10 minutes and then your ink pad will be ready to go. And I do recommend that maybe closing it back up because we don't want it to dry out, and having that ink all sit on top right there ready to go. So there's our stamping ink pads as well. So the next one I want to share with you is your ink refills. Now, as I shared with you before, when you do purchase your stamping ink pads, that it's best to also purchase a refill. Now, refills can be used more than just simply refilling your ink pad. And there are many different techniques that you can do with this, which I will share with you at a later episode. But for today, I'm just going to show you one quick thing that you can actually do with your ink refills. So I have a baby wipe here, okay? Now let's say you don't have all the stamp colors, but you have ink refills, because the refills are definitely a lot cheaper than your ink pads, okay? Especially if you're starting out. Okay, so I've just got some scrap paper down underneath there for me. Let me just grab. Okay, so I'm going to put some drops of re-inker, and as you can see, as it's touched that wet one or that baby wipe, the color has just spread. So by this way, I'm creating my own ink pad. Okay, and then I'm simply going to stamp this using my image, and then I'm going to stamp it on my cardstock. And look at that. Okay, there you go. Can you see that? How awesome does that look? Okay, and this ink pad right here is going to stay perfect coloring. I can get so many uses out of this one little mini ink pad that I have just created. Okay, so that's just one thing that you can do with your ink refills, is create your own ink pad. Okay, so that's another thing too I recommend getting your ink refills for. Let's talk about black ink. There are many different types of black ink out on the market here, and Memento Black is probably my all-time favorite ink. This is my go-to black ink, and when you stamp it, here's a little example of a stamped image using my black ink. Now, why do we like Memento Black ink? Well, one, it is fade resistant, it's alcohol resistant, and it's fast drying. So it is great to use for your stamping blends or any alcohol markers that you may have as well for coloring in. So here's an example of an image or a card that I've created. I've stamped my image in Memento Black ink, and I've colored using my alcohol markers, my stamping blends, and you'll notice there's no bleeding or anything like that. So it holds its color very, very well. So that's one thing too. It is quick drying. It's my go-to when I'm wanting to stamp my greeting or use black ink on my project in any way that I need to. The other thing a tip that you may want to do is to ensure that you also have an ink refill. So you want to keep the ink pad fresh with your refill on hand at any one time. Now, I do ink this up quite a bit because I do use a lot of black ink, so I do find myself reaching for this often. However, I'm still on my first bottle of re-inker, and I only ever use this re-inker basically to fill my ink pad only, unlike the classic ink ones, because they're water-based. There's so many different techniques you can use just purely with the re-inkers themselves, so I can use these more than just refilling or topping up my ink pads. So that's our Memento Black ink. The other black ink that we have is Stays On ink. Okay, and here's an image with my stays on. Okay, so you probably see not much difference between the Memento and the stays on. However, stays on is great for the non-porous surfaces like your acetate, your glass, your metal, your glossy cardstock. It's very quick drying and it's archival based, which means it is best for watercoloring. So here is a card that I've created where I've stamped my image in stays on ink, and then I've gone ahead and used a blender pen and done some watercoloring on my project here. Okay, this one here, I have done some ink around here, and I've used an aqua painter and watercolored my image there. So the downside to stays on ink though is that it will stain your stamps. Okay, so as you can see here, this one's pretty well stained. So you want to clean your stamp set straight after using your stays on. And I recommend that you use something like this, which is called a stays on cleaner. And I'll show you how to use this in a future episode. Okay, once again, you will need a re-inker, and here's my stays on re-inker. Now your stays on ink pad does come with this little plastic covering on here. You always want to keep that on there after use. So don't toss that out, okay? Because that's what's going to keep your ink pad nice and moist. And it has a very strong smell to it. So will knock you out. So don't go sniffing it, okay? So definitely keep that out. Your stays on ink will dry out faster than any ink you have. So that's why it's always great to have a stays on ink refill handy at any one time. And that's our stays on ink. So I only ever use this one if I'm doing watercoloring. That's what I like to use this one for. So next we have our Whisper White ink here, and like this is an old style ink pad. The new Whisper White will come in the newer style ink pad like this. Okay, and when you do purchase it, it will come with your ink refill already included, and you will have to go ahead and re-ink your stamp pad. Whisper White ink is very, very juicy. Being craft ink, it is extremely juicy, and so when you purchase your ink pad, it will come bare. There'll be no ink on it. You'll need to use at least probably about 3/4 to a half a bottle of your re-inker on here, and constantly swiping, let it soak in, let it sit for a while, apply more ink until you get the coverage or the intensity of ink in your ink pad. Now be wary when you do stamp with your Whisper White ink, because it will be very wet and it does take quite a long time to dry. Now this was stamped earlier on dark cardstock. Okay, so it's already dried, but it will smear very quickly and very easily. The other thing you can do is heat emboss with this. And so as you can see on this ink pad here, I have stamped in white ink and then heat embossed, or add some embossing powder in white embossing powder over the top of that as well. Okay, so that's another little fun technique that you can do because it's so juicy. You can actually use embossing, heat embossing on this as well. So your Whisper White ink is best for heat embossing or to create an opaque look on your dark cardstock. My tip here is to always allow plenty of time to dry before commencing your project, because you don't want to smear that while you're finishing your project as well. Our final ink that we have for you here is our Versamark ink. Once again, you will need a refill for it. And the Versamark ink is basically, it's versatile. It is clear ink. So I'll give you an example of what that looks like. Okay, so here's an example of what it looks like when I've stamped it on cardstock here. Now I've just used Versamark ink, okay, it's clear ink. It takes on a tone darker than the cardstock that you've used. So if you don't have the color ink that you're looking for, you can always stamp it on the cardstock and it will take on a tone darker than the actual cardstock. So here is the one we did earlier before where we stamped the greeny apple green ink onto greeny apple green cardstock, and here I've stamped Versamark ink on greeny apple green cardstock. So you can see the difference. One obviously is a lot darker because it's ink, and this one here is Versamark because it's a clear ink. So it's just taking on one shade darker of the cardstock itself. So this is best for embossing or creating a tone-on-tone effect or watermark effect as well. So you can use this with the heat tool and add your embossing powder and you can get this kind of effect. So I've used my Versamark ink, as you can see that nice shine and shimmer. I have gold embossing powder, clear and white, and that always leaves a nice shiny look. Okay, and as you can see, this is taken on a shade of balmy blue, but then I've added my embossing powder at the top of it and it's just intensified it a little bit more, which is awesome. Okay, so it is wet drying. Just like your craft ink, you can heat emboss with this one as well. So there you have it, a brief overview of the ins and outs of inking and all the different types that are out there and what the best use for your ink is. So let's go over a little quick recap. We have our classic ink pad right here, which is great for your basic stamping, your tone-on-tone look when you're stamped on coloured cardstock. We have our ink refills, which are great to refill your ink pads when they dry out, and plus many other techniques that you can do with that, which we'll show at a future episode. Memento Black, this is my go-to black. This is great for your basic stamping or using your alcohol markers. It is fast drying and fade resistant. We have our Stays on ink. Forgot about our Stays on ink. This is extremely fast drying. It's great to stamp on non-porous surface like acetate, glass, metal, glossy cardstock, and it's perfect for watercoloring. Okay, but just remember that you will need something like a Stays on ink cleaner when using your Stays on ink so that it doesn't stain your stamp sets. We have our Whisper White cardstock, which is great for embossing or create an opaque look on dark cardstock, but just remember that it is slow drying, so it may smudge, and so make sure it dries before finishing your project. And finally, we have our Versamark ink, which is also great for heat embossing and creating like a watermark effect on clear cardstock or adding a tone-on-tone effect to your colored cardstock. You have it. There's all you need to know about ink, all the ins and outs and everything. So your challenge this week is to select your ink. So I recommend that you start with a black ink, and I shared with you a couple of different types of black ink. So go select which one you think will work for you, and then go ahead and select either 1 or 2 colored inks. And Step It Up have 50 different colors of ink. The most popular are the Regal's collection or the Brights collection are the most popular. But what I recommend you do is look at the stamp set that you had selected from last week's challenge and look at what kind of colors would you need to go with that stamp set. So if you picked a nature stamp set, then obviously you're going to want some browns and some greens to complement that. If you picked a floral image, then you're going to want something with bright, bold colors to highlight your flowers. So go ahead, have a look at your stamp set, work out what colors you would need to create. Remember, we have our Whisper White cardstock from episode 1, your stamp set from episode 2, and now we're going to select the ink to go with that stamp set. So have fun with that, and I'll catch you next week where we're going to be discussing the basic stamping technique. So grab your ink, your stamp set, and your Whisper White cardstock and join me next week. I'm Kristy Coromandel, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.